how to grease the Bafang M620 e-bike motor. You will first need to remove the motor from your bike to do this. Check the link in the description for a guide on how to do this. To do this, you will need the following: a 4mm Allen key, a plastic wedge, we use a tire lever, and your motor grease of choice. Lint-free shop towel or clean lint-free shop rags. We also recommend heavy-duty nitrile gloves and safety glasses. BikeTricks recommends using one of the following greases for your motor: Mobilith SCH100, Mobile Grease 28, or John Deere Cornhead Grease. Open up your motor by removing the following 6 screws with a 4mm Allen key. Use the plastic tire lever as a wedge to separate the motor controller from the motor housing. Note that there is a gasket in this gap. Take your time separating this with the wedge so as to not tear the motor gasket. Once you have loosened the 2 pieces of the assembly, you can open the motor. Carefully separate the motor and controller. Reseat any retaining pins that may have came loose while opening the motor. Inspect the gasket for any damage and move it to the controller side of the assembly. Unplug the connectors between the motor and controller. There are 2 small connectors going to the controller for torque and temperature sensors. Take note of where those 2 connectors are plugged into for later. Then, unplug the blue, green, and yellow phase wires. With everything unplugged, you can set the controller aside. You can now remove the gears for the cleaning and greasing process. Note that these 2 secondary gears may be on either side of the motor or controller upon separation. This outermost gear should be able to be removed by wiggling it with your hands. If it can't be removed by hand, gently use the plastic wedge to loosen, then lift the gear out. Use the wedge to loosen this second gear. Then remove it from the motor. Begin cleaning the old grease from the motor and main motor gear. Use shop towel and thoroughly clean out the old, worn grease from the motor. Clean out any excess grease on the controller half of the motor. You want the motor as clean as possible to ensure your new grease is not contaminated. You can now set your controller aside. Clean the old grease from the 2 previously removed gears. Ensure you remove all of the old grease during this cleaning process. You want the motor fully cleaned to ensure the new grease is not contaminated. Now, take one of our recommended greases and begin applying it to the motor. Start with the main gear of the motor. Rotate the gear with a dab of grease on your other finger to apply grease to all of the teeth. Apply some grease to the top face of the gear as well. Lightly grease the middle gear as shown here. Apply grease to the smaller right side gear. Apply grease to all of the teeth along with the top and bottom face. Insert this gear back into the motor. Apply grease to the middle motor gear. Ensure you apply grease to all of its teeth. Now, insert this gear back into the motor. The smaller diameter geared portion is installed facing downwards. Rotate if needed to install. Add a bit more grease to the top face of the gears as you can see here. Wipe off any excess grease from your gloves before continuing any further. Examine the controller gasket. If it is ripped, the gasket should be replaced. Make note of any small tears or cuts. These may become future failure points. Reconnect the wires on the controller that were previously unplugged. Plug the large white torque sensor connector into its corresponding slot on the controller. Reconnect the small temperature sensor plug to the same slot you unplugged it from. Ensure you properly reconnect each phase wire to the correct color coordinated wire. You may need to rotate one connector end 180 degrees to connect these. If your gasket is torn, you may need to replace it. Ensure the gasket and retaining pins are properly aligned. Insert the retaining pins on the larger motor half with the gasket being on either side. Push the phase wires into this cavity within the motor. Carefully close the motor, taking care not to pinch any of the wires. You may need to push down on the motor lightly to ensure it's fully closed. Reinstall the 6 screws you removed at the start of the greasing process. Tighten the screws by hand with the Allen key, taking care not to strip them. Wipe down the outside of the motor to clean off any excess grease on it. Your motor is now re-greased. Reinstall it back onto your bike and take it out for a ride.